have a very strong sense of fairness. Being able to speak up on behalf of other people was the thing that naturally meant that that was a profession that I sort of moved toward. You are continually exposed to the downsides of life, and mental health was never talked about. And I think probably the one thing that saddens me the most, there was never any support. I didn't go to law school for 7 years to end up in prison next to you.
And get up, go to 3 police stations in a night.
Yeah.
Be nice to everybody and do a trial for a week.
If you find something you enjoy, you'll never work a day in your life. He sent me a card and it said to Zoe, in Greek, Zoe means life, and that's what you've given me. And they are the things that you don't forget, because what you do matters.
Hello, I'm Charles Peter. Today we're delighted to welcome Zoe Gascoyne, a hugely respected figure in criminal and financial law and a former chair of the Criminal Law Solicitors Association. Zoe was recently awarded an OBE in the King's Birthday Honours for services to complex tax investigations, a well-deserved recognition of an impressive career in public service. Zoe held senior leadership roles at the CPS, prosecuting serious economic crime and organised crime at a national level, following many years in private practice. Born and raised in the Wirral, Zoe's work is driven by a strong belief that tax crime is not victimless and that everyone, regardless of wealth or power, must play by the same rules. Zoe, it's a real pleasure to welcome you here this afternoon.
Hi.
Well, let's get into it. Could you paint a picture of your early life? What aspects of your upbringing or childhood experiences do you think set you on the path toward a life in the law?
Oh, that's a tough one. To be honest, I have absolutely no idea. But the only thing that I do know is it is what I always wanted to do. My parents said they probably described me as being a little bit odd. Loved police dramas, loved The Bill, loved Juliet Bravo, and just decided from a really, really early age, actually in the first instance, that I wanted to be a barrister, but I knew that criminal law was what I wanted to go into.
Well, that's funny because when I was young, back in the 18th century, there was a television programme at lunchtime when I came home from school called Crown Court.
Wow.
And I can remember the music now, and I'd sit in front of it, watching it and thinking, ooh,
yeah,
I'd really like to do that. I don't know what these people are, and I don't know why they're wearing wigs, but ooh. And I have a view about that, and I don't know whether you agree with it, but I always wanted to be on the stage because I loved the idea of people clapping. I can remember it clearly when I did any stage stuff in school, that people were clapping, and I loved that attention. And I wonder whether advocates feel a degree of that attention as well.
Yeah, so do you know what? It's funny that, because I've never, ever thought about it like that. One of my other big passions growing up was speech and drama. I absolutely loved doing speech and drama. And I've never thought, obviously you have to have the confidence to be an advocate. For me, mine was always more around have a very strong sense of fairness. And I think being able to speak up on behalf of other people was the thing that naturally meant that that was a profession that I sort of moved towards and wanted to be part of.
So there was always that sense of putting right and unfairness.
Yes,
I suppose.
100%. It was exactly the same in school. Just over anything that felt unfair, I always felt like I wanted to do something about it.
Yes. Is there anyone in particular that inspired this sense of justice when you were young? Any particular events, perhaps?
Not necessarily that I can pinpoint. I just always remember wanting to do it. And I was, out of my friends, I was known for being the person who wanted to go into criminal law, and I was laughing because I had seen one of my school friends' mums that I'm still close with the other day. In fact, it was just last week. And she was recounting the story of how she remembers us being teenagers and she used to pick us up and give us lifts, and how I always had this life plan. And she was laughing because she said she feels like, I haven't quite followed it to the letter, obviously, because things have changed over the years. But I certainly did what I wanted to do, and which has been lovely. But there was never anything else for me.
So when you left school,
Yep.
Because I've read this in your biography, you did sociology and criminology.
I did.
Rather than law?
Yes.
Why did you do that?
Should I give a made-up story of the truth? I'll give the truth. Because at the time, I was the first in my family to go down the university path. And I was really nervous, actually, about having to go to university. And my dad had said to me, if you're going to go to university, go and do it properly. Don't be staying at home. Go and live away. And I didn't really want to do that. And so I looked at various courses. I went to Leeds, I went to Sheffield. And then because it was criminal law that I was interested in, I discovered that I could go to Bangor University and do criminology. And I thought, right, well, I can do that. And then actually what I can then do is look to do the CPE, the conversion course. So I did that. So there was criminology was always something that fascinated me. And of course, at that time, Robbie Coltrane was on the television with Cracker.
Yes.
So you were never allowed at that time to do criminology and psychology because no university wanted to be turning out mini crackers. So I did criminology and sociology.
Now, tell the truth. The course that you did, the
Yep.
undergraduate course in sociology and criminology, lots of theories,
Yeah.
lots of ideas about why people commit crime.
Yeah.
Lots of ideas about structural inequalities causing crime.
Oh, yeah.
Lots of ideas about the powerful and the weak.
Yeah.
When you actually, and I'm leaping ahead a bit here, but
It's fine.
when you actually became a practicing defence lawyer,
Yeah.
how did that sit with that theoretical background?
Well, it didn't really. It didn't really. I think for me, the thing that I did get out of the degree, and actually that I think has meant I've come full circle, is the one thing that I remember being really interested in, and in fact it was what my dissertation was on, was white-collar crime. So why people who are otherwise in life set up to be good law-abiding citizens turn to fraud. And of course, it's very relevant to the position that I hold now. But actually, I found that interesting. I think in terms of the career itself, probably what it does do is set you up to understand that actually there are a mixture of people in society, and some of those people are less well placed to have a voice. They are less well placed to make improvements to their own lives, and they do need additional support. And sometimes, as strange as it sounds, that does come in the form of being a defence solicitor, because when you're a defence solicitor, as you will know, you become so much more. You're more than somebody who goes and speaks on their behalf before a court.
Yeah. I think it's quite interesting about white-collar crime, because I know there's a discipline and a theory about that now, but probably when you were doing it, I don't think it was particularly well developed then.
No.
But it is interesting to try to understand why it is that people that don't suffer from structural issues in their background, or all the other things that people like to talk of every day, why does a person who's in a good job,
Yeah.
who has everything to lose,
Yeah.
decide they're going to fiddle the books,
Yeah.
let's say? Do you have an idea what the answer to that might be?
Greed. I would say, and I think I've probably formed that opinion from working both in defence, prosecution and investigation. It's a motivation to always want more. It's never enough. And actually there is that greed. Sometimes there is a sense of entitlement. Because I have worked harder or done better, I deserve more than the next person.
Yes, that does make sense. Interesting. Anyway,
Yes.
I'm jumping around the place.
It's my fault.
Let's go back to finishing in Bangor University,
Yes.
which is a very windy and cold place, as I remember. Then you do the CPE.
Yes, I did.
And then where did you go then?
So I moved home and I went to Chester College of Law and I stayed there for 2 years. So I did the CPE there and then I went straight into the legal practice course.
Yes. Well, in my day, it was called the finals.
Yes.
And the worst year of my life. But we're not here to talk about my life. So you're taught, you do criminology, you do the transfer, you do the LPC as it was then. And you come out of the LPC knowing almost nothing relevant to the practice of criminal law, I guess.
That's right, because even then I would say everything in terms of your education around the law wasn't really weighted towards a career in criminal law. It was more civil, commercial. You were in the minority if you wanted to do criminal law. And so finding training contracts at that time was just almost impossible, almost impossible. So yeah, you finished and off you went to try and sort yourself out. Yes,
I think my memory is that criminal law was always regarded as the bin end of law.
Yep.
That you don't really want to do.
Nope.
Real lawyers don't want to do that sort of thing. It's more for social workers, that type of thing. When we know it was very different.
Yes.
And then you either had the fortune or misfortune of starting your practice life in Liverpool Magistrates Court.
Well, started off, got a training contract with Bell Lam & Joinson, who were Birkenhead and Wallasey based, and spent 2 years with them doing my training contract before I qualified and entered the world of Liverpool Magistrates.
Now, I left or stopped practicing about the time you started.
Yes.
I don't think we'd have overlapped, really. I can't remember now. It's a long time ago.
It's a long time ago.
But there is one thing that we'll always remember, is your first days on your feet.
Oh, yes.
In a court.
Yes.
What was that like?
Terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. So I moved and moved firms, finished my training contract, and then I moved 2 weeks before I qualified, so didn't have very long to get used to the firm or Liverpool Magistrates Court, which was very intimidating in those days for somebody who was newly qualified and female in particular. And the first day that I qualified, it was, right, there's your files, off you pop. And I can remember sitting in the old court 2 of Dale Street Magistrates, and I was only there to deal with an unpaid fine, and it felt like the most terrifying experience of my life. And I remember saying to the usher, it's my first day. Oh, you'll be fine, you'll be fine. And I can remember sitting there practically all morning waiting to be the last person. And every time somebody else came in, I stood up and walked out so I'd lose my place, and then I came back in. And then that's it. You sort of like spotlight on you. I can remember standing up and feeling a bit lost, but managing to somehow stumble through it. But once you've got over that first, like with everything, it just becomes easier as time goes on.
I think in those days, the place generally that magistrates' court work was pretty aggressive.
Yes.
And I understand it's not the same anymore.
I don't think so, no.
And perhaps people who are looking to go into criminal law now wouldn't face the same harassment that perhaps you may have faced, or I did 20 years before. Perhaps their journey will be a little bit easier, perhaps.
I think, do you know what? It will probably be an awful lot easier and an awful lot kinder and an awful lot smoother. But I think, when I look back, that was probably part of the fun of the job. I can remember, when you talk about adversaries, it felt like you had a proper adversary. I loved nothing more than a stand-up, sit-down bail application where actually you were doing your job. The magistrates retired to consider what their decision was going to be, and you were back talking to the prosecutor about what they'd had for the tea last night, what they'd watched on the television. But when those magistrates came into court, the gloves were off.
They don't teach you that in law school, do they?
They definitely don't. They definitely don't.
So if you were advising somebody now, comes to see you and said, well, I'd like to be a criminal lawyer, What would you suggest to do in preparation of that? What would you ask them to do? What would you suggest?
Do you know what? I think a lot of it is down to people skills, because I think for me, it's all about human interaction. Actually, whether you're dealing with a client directly, whether you're dealing with somebody who is prosecuting, whether you're speaking to the magistrate, to a judge, district judge, clerks, ushers, it's just having people skills. So, I mean, if I think about part-time jobs, I worked in a play scheme. I used to do them during my summers whilst I was at university. That stands you in good stead for being able to deal with youths, because you know how to talk to them, you know how to interact. Working in pubs, brilliant working in pubs, because you deal with people, whether they're drunk, happy, sad, angry, So I kind of think, for me, it's all about how you interact with people, and people who aren't like you and have a different background from you.
So you start, you're in a large city centre criminal practice.
Yep.
You're a female.
Yes.
What problems did you have starting out being new and a woman in such an environment? What stands out for you about that?
So a couple of things spring to mind. I would probably say less so in terms of clients, although I do remember one particular instance of turning up to deal with a long-standing client of the firm who was expecting one of the male partners, and just looked me up and down and said, who are you? And I said, well, I'm here to represent you. And he said, well, you better make a good job of it then. And actually then I ended up making such a good job of it that he never left me. Another occasion, you could turn up as duty solicitor, because of course you turn up to police stations, you don't just do courts, you do police stations. Sometimes police stations as duty solicitor. So if somebody gets arrested and they don't have a known solicitor, as we know, they can opt to call a duty solicitor. And quite often you would find defendants in custody in that environment, sometimes with different backgrounds, who just refuse to recognise a female representative, because sometimes the background they had or the country they came from didn't allow them to. That was always a bit of a struggle. And then a couple of occasions in court, very early on, when I've asked either to show my practising certificate to the magistrates or to move because I was sitting where the solicitors sat, which feels shocking because it's not that long ago. But then, having said that, when I did work experience for the first time when I was at school, women weren't allowed to wear trousers in court. So we were still at that stage, there were expectations were that you wore a skirt and you did not wear trousers.
Yes, I remember that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I also remember, though, because I think it's important to say, that my boss was a woman.
Yes.
And when I first went to court or went to police stations, I had the same response. Who are you?
Yes.
Where's... I won't give a name.
No.
And I thought, well, this is a great start. Where do I go from here? So I don't know whether... I think it's probably because of a person being young and new, and they just think, who the hell are you, as you say. It's a very stressful job, looking back on it.
Looking back. I don't think you realised this at the time.
No. And when you think about what you had to do...
Yep.
Often up during the night.
Yep. More
than one police station.
Yes.
Always. I mean, you never go to a police station and it's a nice, engaged environment.
Never.
There's always heightened stress. There are always problems. It's always very difficult.
Yes.
And then you've got to go and do the trial that you're prepared for, if you had time, the next day.
Yep.
And I think at the time, it's quite exciting.
Yep.
There's definitely that element. And you can feel as though you're making a difference. But it does get very wearing.
It does. Yep.
And what I'm always interested in is how do you manage those stresses with the job over the years that you were involved in criminal defence?
So I've thought about this quite a lot, because obviously over the years mental health has become a much talked about topic, and mental health was never talked about. And I think probably the one thing that saddens me the most is that there was never any support. Though literally, if you think about it, you've just said it then. you deal with people who have, as a general rule, hit rock bottom. And you never go to a police station for a good reason. You might go to a police station for people who are used to living that kind of life. But, you go to police stations also for people whose lives have come off the tracks for whatever reason. And I think at the time, you don't realise how stressful it is. I think it's only when you look back. That you realise that you are not exposed to things that other people in other walks of life are exposed to. You are continually exposed to the downsides of life. And I, looking back, think that you get through that through camaraderie with just other colleagues. I think, there was a culture that meant actually everybody got on. I can only speak really for sort of like the Liverpool legal scene at that time. But everybody was in it together. You probably developed, a sense of humour over things that other people might not understand or find funny. But just talking to people, being around people. You wouldn't talk about it outside of work because, I used to often stop and think, God, if my mum knew that I was having to sit, in a cell and talk to somebody about this, she'd be horrified, like literally. And I think it was probably a good job that nobody in my family ever thought about what I actually did in the day, in the job, because you wouldn't want to talk about it to anybody else, but you get through it. And, I look back now, I think it's character building. I think, it gives you experience that I can't think that you would get in many other jobs, but it's tough.
Yeah. I think there's some literature in the last 10 years about vicarious trauma for criminal defence lawyers, because I used to live that trauma that other people have been through.
Yes.
And it's not just one instance of that trauma. It could be 17 different cases a day, each one traumatic.
Yes.
And in some way, those of us that survive for a period of time develop a degree of resilience.
100%.
And what interests me is what is it that allows you to develop that resilience? Is it a character trait? Is it some sort of technique that you employ so that you don't directly absorb all the emotional content of the cases in which you appear? What do you think it is?
I don't know. And do you know what? It's a really, really, really good question, because I don't think that I probably think that you can either do the job or you can't. And I think that you probably find out quite quickly whether you can or whether you can't. And there's moments that I can think of. I can remember once when I worked at Quinn Melville, we had a new office junior in, and one of my partners who sat next to me had given us some photocopying to do. And I remember looking up and seeing one of the secretaries say, "Oh gosh, are you all right? You're pale, come and sit down." And he'd given her post-mortem photographs to photocopy. It hadn't even entered his head. That's no criticism of him. It wouldn't have entered mine. They were just papers in a case. And it did make me stop and think we had to send her home, and it was awful. And I remember stopping and thinking, how have we done this to this poor girl? But there was an acceptance that was just part of our job. And, I suppose you built your character around that resilience to a certain extent. I can remember when I was training, and this probably just isn't funny now, it was amusing at the time. One of my supervising partners when I was training told me that I had to go to a post-mortem. And they took me to a post-mortem in Arrow Park Hospital, and everybody stood there, police included, waiting to see whether the trainee would pass out or not. And I didn't need to be there. I thought I did, but it was just one of those things. And it does build a certain, it builds a resilience. And actually, I kind of think it helps you deal with some stuff in life, because actually, I think it helps you put things into context, because quite often when things happen, you can stop and think, right, well, that's not that bad, actually. I know what bad is. I think the flip side of that, it makes you quite cynical. Because you become very cynical.
Yeah, I think that a lot of A lot of lawyers in my day dealt with the stresses of the job by drinking too
Yes.
much alcohol.
Yeah.
And I think looking back, that was very prevalent.
Yes.
That there was an enormously high level of drink culture.
Yeah.
And that's no good for you
No.
either, is it?
No.
And of course, if once you get involved in the running of a practice or becoming more accountable
Yeah.
for the financial side of a practice, there's that extra problem.
Mm-hmm.
Because criminal work was, and even worse now, I understand, was very badly paid.
Yeah.
There may be a few fat cats in the world, 2 or 3 of them, but the rest of us certainly weren't.
No.
And that was another added pressure. Anyway, let's go back to where we were before we get carried away. And your early practice, you're in Liverpool Magistrates Court.
Yeah.
And I guess I know the answer to the question I'm going to ask before I ask it, but there may be people in the audience who are very keen on this question because it's a sort of formal question in a way. How did you navigate ethical dilemmas as a young defence solicitor?
So, do you know, I don't mind this question at all, actually, because I think for me, easily is the answer. I think, you know, part of going into the law, and probably in particular criminal law, is about sort of having integrity. And it's about, you know, why do you do it? So why have you followed that path? If you've followed that path because actually you have a strong sense of fairness and a sense of justice, you're doing the job for the right reasons. And so actually it doesn't matter, because if you do the job for the right reasons, you make the right decisions. And, you know, everybody's age-old favourite question is, how can you represent somebody who you know is guilty? And the answer to that is quite complicated, because if you know somebody is guilty, you're not representing them as being innocent. You know, and actually, I think, again, how you approach your career defines the type of lawyer that you were going to be. And I think for me, I was always known for being absolutely straight down the line. There was never an instance where I was anything but straight down the line. And if people came to me for advice, they got advice and they got it straight. And either they liked it or they didn't. And that was a matter for them and not for me. But, you know, if you start off like that, you don't put yourself in a position where you're having to navigate those difficulties, you know. And I tried to sort of like teach and embed that into lots of the people who worked with me, you know, along the way. Don't ever compromise who you are. I can remember saying to people, I didn't go to law school for 7 years to end up in prison next to you, you know. So it was they're easy choices to make once you get them straight in your head.
Well, not everyone's like that.
No, not everybody is.
Previous colleagues that have done exactly that.
There
have ended
are.
up in a cell next to the people they were representing. But we won't go into that.
Oh, we won't.
So you're practicing, you're doing the job day in and day out, and all sorts of different cases, different people.
Yes.
It's endless and tiring. And then comes a time when you want to get more involved in representing not only people accused of crimes,
Yes,
but those of us that represented them as well.
Yeah.
Namely the Criminal Law Solicitors Association. Am I right?
That's right.
What made you do that?
Oh,
I'm going to ask this question a lot, I think. What made you do
What made me do that? Do you know what? Actually, I've never really thought about that. But actually, let's go back to where I was at the beginning about the fairness, because this seems to be an issue that I have. Again, it goes back to that strong sense of fairness. And I can remember a meeting that I went to in Liverpool. I might have been in the Marriott Hotel or somewhere like that. And sitting there, feeling absolutely outraged at proposals that the government had in relation to legal aid, and thinking, this just isn't fair. You know, how are these people going to be heard? How are they going to be represented? You know, actually having a fair justice system depends on providing a right to representation. You know, that it's a fundamental right. And I just felt really strongly about it. And so I decided, well, if you feel strongly about something, you can't just sit in the background and complain about it. So I'm going to try and help do something about it. And I just joined the Criminal Law Solicitors Association, and then ultimately found myself very swiftly being drafted into the committee and then being asked, would you like to be chair? And thinking, how have I found myself here? Before I can stop myself from saying no, one of my weaknesses, I said, yes, of course I will, because who doesn't want to do that with 3 really young children and a full-time job? But I think I felt so strongly about the cause, and actually, not just what it meant for solicitors in terms of the legal aid payments, but what it meant for society and what it meant for people who couldn't have that discussion, weren't in a position to. And so, yes, that's how that happened.
And it was a very interesting time politically.
Very.
And it's a change in role, because suddenly you're going to be becoming slightly more, a lot more politically active in the CLSA. And for those people that are watching this who have no idea what we're talking about, tell us a little bit of what you can about the exciting things and the challenging things that happened when you were in that role.
So again, asked to become chair, started to become more involved in things. And then obviously these were conversations that got traction with the government. Just completely alien to me, because obviously you live and work in Liverpool with nothing to do with the government at all. And then before I knew it, was being invited to have discussions with the Ministry of Justice. Can't even say that I understood the civil service at that point in time. And actually, those discussions I found okay. I think if I thought about them before I went, I would have sort of felt quite intimidated. But then having those conversations and explaining your point of view to people who don't do the job on a daily basis, actually felt quite easy. And I can remember probably one of my first conversations speaking to 2 deputy directors, didn't understand the grade. They meant absolutely nothing. And I remember talking almost at them in a way that, and this was happening in relation to committal hearings and and they just said, can we just stop you? What's a committal hearing? And I just looked at them and thought, how is it that... Anyway, explained everything and realised actually if I put myself in their shoes, one of the things that they needed me to do was translate and unpick some of the reasons that actually there was all of this noise and aggravation. And actually I had very good relationships with them. And then that led to various meetings with different Lord Chancellors, which was an experience, round tables and then smaller meetings. But actually, again, it's about communication, because the Lord Chancellors no previous history, background, and so I was there to almost interpret or translate why it was we were making such a noise and what it was that needed to change, really.
I mean, traditionally, the Lord Chancellor came from the legal profession. And recently, that doesn't always seem to have been the case.
No.
And you'd think that they would at least be provided with some information before they came into a meeting about what on earth it was they're going to be talking about.
And I think to a certain extent they did. But then I think having a briefing document and then trying to bring what is in that briefing document to light by the people who live and breathe that are probably two very different things. And, I suppose to a degree, that communication then became really, really important in terms of getting the point across. So much like you stand up before a court, and argue your case on behalf of a client, to a certain extent, those skills became transferable in that environment.
Well, was there a time in those discussions that you felt you were hitting your head against a brick wall and that nothing significant was going to change?
With one Lord Chancellor, yes. But with another Lord Chancellor, no, because there was movement and a change. So it shouldn't. I don't actually think it necessarily was personality driven. It would have been circumstances. But I think one of them was far more comfortable in trying to have a conversation and listen than another one.
I must assume that the political world has its own priorities very different from our world.
Yes.
And with, if I remember correctly, around that time, certain newspapers like the Daily Mail, etc., were very much against people being represented.
Yeah.
Because the newspapers almost judged them before the court did.
Oh,
and
yes.
decided, why are we throwing away public money on people that are clearly guilty? That seemed to be the headlines that you saw all the time.
That's right.
And I suppose politically speaking, those people that were making these decisions had certain inability to extend their purse strings, but at the same time, they wanted to get back into power or stay in power by the very types of newspapers that were saying these things. So it must have been very difficult for you to juggle all those things.
Yeah, it was. But I think when you feel strongly about something, it helps with the drive. So, yeah, it was, as I say, it would never have been something that I had planned to do, but circumstances happened and, yeah.
So after this,
yes.
You must have been exhausted.
Yes.
And you still got a practice to run.
Yes.
Still got all these people to represent.
Yes.
They're all getting younger and more difficult.
Yes.
And then you have to go home. How long did you manage to stick it out?
So, that's a good question.
I managed 20 years.
In total 16 years.
Well, that's a long time.
Yeah, 16 years.
That's enough.
Yeah.
People always said it was a young man's game.
Yeah.
Because they didn't have women in those days. But a young man's game. Because there's only so many times, as we've already said, when you can get up, go to 3 police stations in a night.
Yeah.
Be nice to everybody. And, and do a trial for a week.
Yeah.
Now, there comes a change.
Yes.
Something's going on in your mind at that time, it seems.
Mm-hmm.
And a change is coming.
Yes.
What was that?
So it wasn't necessarily a planned change. I think, as you're right, I think I became tired. And the job was changing. It was, it was becoming a different job than the one that I'd started and I'd loved. It was becoming harder to do. Financially, it was becoming harder to manage because things weren't going to get better. There was no signs of them getting better. And I've never, ever done the job for the salary. I wouldn't have done it had I been that way motivated. And I saw, I'd never, ever, ever thought about joining the Crown Prosecution Service. I saw a job advertised for the Specialist Fraud Division. Didn't even know that there was a Specialist Fraud Division in the Crown Prosecution Service. And I saw it had been advertised on Twitter. And I thought, oh, that looks interesting. And then I realised,
on Twitter.
Well, it wasn't advertised on Twitter. I had seen it being posted on Twitter. Sorry, yes, it was on Crime Line. Actually, it's all Andrew Keogh's fault. It had been, sort of like shared through that route, and I'd seen it, and I thought, oh, a fraud. I'm quite interested in that. And I rang somebody who used to be a partner of mine, who's now a barrister, and I said, do you think I could do this job? And he said, of course you can, mate. Just put an application in. And I'd never, ever, ever had to do a formal application for a job. So, yeah, I put in an application for, in fact, 2 jobs at the time. One was a deputy director and had no idea about the grade. And one was as a grade 7 lawyer, both in specialist fraud. Unfortunately, the deputy director campaign ran first. And I had a complete change. And I was offered the job of Deputy Director in the Specialist Fraud Division at the Crown Prosecution Service.
That must have been quite a change.
It was unbelievable. And the worst thing at the time, and I remember this because it was in October 2017, and I went down to London for the interview. And the following day, I was on my way to Llandudno Magistrates Court, and my phone rang and I pulled over and it was the Director of Public Prosecutions. It was Alison Saunders, and she said, hi Zoe, and I said, hello, and she said, are you in a position you can speak? I said, yes I am, I've just pulled over. And she offered me the job, and she said, but you can't really say anything just yet because we need to formalise the offer, but we just wanted to know, would you be interested in principle? And I said, yes, I think so. And so she said, right, we'll talk you through the next steps, and sort of like over the next few days you have to go through security clearance, etc., and it was going to be months because of that. before I could formally accept the job. And then I got notification to say that I had been listed as a finalist for the Private Practice Lawyer of the Year in the Law Society Awards. And I just thought, oh no, this can't be happening, because I can't be a finalist in the Private Practice the Private Practice Lawyer of the Year Awards when I'm about to jump ship to the public sector anyway. I politely declined the invite, and they rang me up and they said, no, you really must come. And I was like, oh, okay. They said it's not good, for finalists not to be there. And then I turned up and won. And it was just the most surreal moment, having to go up onto the stage and accept this, with all of the fuss that comes with it, and the thank you and the thinking,
knowing what might happen next.
This is going to be awful now. And it wasn't. It was fine. Everyone was lovely.
An interesting thing here is that if you've gone to the bar,
yes,
you spend your life prosecuting and defending.
Yes.
And nobody thinks anything of that, because that's normal. You do
right.
both.
Yes.
But if you're a criminal defence solicitor,
yes,
it carries something more than that which is carried by a barrister.
Yes.
And I'm not sure what that is.
No.
And when you changed from defence to prosecution, it's not the same as being a barrister defending one day and prosecuting another day. It's almost as though you've changed sides in a civil war.
Yes. Yeah, it's like shock horror. Like, complete, how can you do this? And, when you put it like that, and I haven't thought about that, the barristers do it all the time, you become a better rounded lawyer. Having worked now on both sides, and if you are a barrister, then for me, do both, because what better a skill and what better experience to have than having worked for both sides and having that real rounded understanding of both sides of the coin. So in actual fact, in hindsight, I think, really strictly speaking, anybody who is thinking about a career in criminal law should be open-minded and not think about being... It's not about sides. Actually, it's about ensuring justice is done. And that is the same whether you prosecute or whether you defend.
And I suppose in the old days, people would say a poacher turned gamekeeper.
Yes. Yep.
And who wouldn't want a poacher if you're a gamekeeper, because you know all the tricks.
That's it.
And so, as you say, it makes you a more rounded practitioner.
Mm.
And I would imagine that it's an entirely different atmosphere.
Yes. Yeah.
And in what way is it different?
So, I don't think I appreciated, obviously, I just applied for a job, didn't appreciate actually sort of like the level that I was going in at, because when you're outside the civil service, you don't. And being helped with the thought by a, really helpful colleague who went, what on earth are you doing? Have you really thought about what you're going to do? And me thinking, but actually just going into it as I've always done everything in my career and my life, not afraid to ask a stupid question if I don't know something. But actually, completely different, but no less enjoyable. I stayed in the Crown Prosecution Service in that job. So I was at the Specialist Fraud Division, and then we transitioned that into the Serious Economic, Organised Crime and International Directorate, which is a bit of a mouthful. I absolutely loved that job. Absolutely loved it. And I'll tell you the one benefit of doing that job is, you think about when you're in private practice, you get those cases, they might be a once in a career case. Well, when you work in that division in the Crown Prosecution Service, that's your daily job. You're responsible for some of the most significant prosecutions in the economic crime space, in particular for me, that there are across the country. So that felt a real privilege.
And I presume your role will have changed in that one day you would have been standing up on your feet, talking completely. All day long.
Yeah.
And then you moved to this new job, and I imagine you didn't go to court very much at all.
Hardly ever. Occasionally, but hardly ever, and certainly no advocacy. And I found that really difficult at first because, of course, as we've both said, one of the reasons that you do the job is the advocacy. And I think, though, then again, it's about your skills with people and building teams. So for me, then I had teams of lawyers that I looked after. I sort of like geographically diverse teams of lawyers. I think when I started, I looked after the Leeds office and the Birmingham office, and then later on in the job, I ended up with Liverpool, then Manchester, then Cardiff. But I had teams of lawyers who I, actually always tried to provide help and support within their cases. Very into the casework. I've always been very interested in the casework. But I think my background helped me in terms of thinking, what happens when this case goes to court? How might this play out? How is this case going to be presented? Because what I brought was 16 years lived experience of being in courts day in, day out. But not only that, knowing, how things work when you're representing people. So being able to understand how a case might be looked at from a defence perspective.
That must have been quite a valuable talent.
Yes, I'd like to think so.
Now, you spent some time there.
Yes.
How many years?
4.5.
4.5 years. And then another opportunity arrives.
It did.
And so we're going on to Zoe part 3.
Part 3.
Tell us about that.
So part 3. So part 3 happened, and part 3 is the funniest to a certain extent for me, because I think had anybody ever said to me, you'll end up working for HMRC, I'd have just laughed. And even actually when I took the job in fraud, somebody said, you do realise you're going to have to do tax work? And I was, because tax is just a minefield, still is to a certain extent. But one of the things that I did do was you have stakeholder engagement relationships when you're in the Crown Prosecution Service. My main ones at first were City of London Police, dealt with the lead, they're the lead force in respect of fraud, NHS, MHRA, and then HMRC. So I took that relationship over in, I think it was 2020, mid-COVID, and just started working really well with them. And then an opportunity came to move to them as a deputy director. So I was asked, would I consider that? And at first I thought, no, because I'm a lawyer, so no. And then I can remember speaking to somebody who is still a colleague now, and he just said, mate, they're not after you for that. They're after you because you're a leader. And I'd never, ever, ever, ever thought of myself as being a leader, ever. It was just, a lawyer. That's all I've set out to be. And I had to think about it. And I thought, what? Why not? Because it's about investigation. It's fraud. It's what I love doing. It's economic crime. So, yeah, I decided, go for it. And so, yeah, I've been there now for 3.5 years. So that's been part 3. So deputy director, and I head up offshore corporate and wealthy fraud investigation.
Offshore.
Corporate and wealthy.
And wealthy,
yes.
Offshore. Mm. So here's a warning to anyone watching this podcast. If you have money outside the jurisdiction, be very careful.
Be very careful.
So where next then? What's part 4 look like?
I've never planned a thing in my life. So who knows? I'm very happy where I am at the moment. I enjoy my job. I think the one thing that I would say to anybody, considering where to go with their career, find something you enjoy. It is a really twee saying, if you find something you enjoy, you'll never work a day in your life. I never, ever, ever have to think, why am I going to work? I never, ever have to think, what's getting me up today. And that's been the case in every role that I've done. Yes, there've been different aspects, and yes, I've been on different sides of the fence, and yes, now, and it is unusual. It is unusual to go from defence to prosecution to criminal investigation, but it's all part and parcel of the criminal justice system. But I've never questioned why. So,
and then something exciting and unexpected, according to the press releases, happened to you.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
That was just, I still can't believe it now to a certain extent. So I'm assuming we're talking about the OBE. Things like that don't happen to people like me. I talked about the award that I'd won before. That was lovely. And that was, there is a level of embarrassment that comes with things like that. But it's lovely, and you can't be ungrateful. But this was just knocked me sideways because, you know, again, it's not a world that I recognise, you know. And yes, letter dropped on the through the door on a Saturday, and I thought I'd been summoned for jury service because it's a very official letter, and I thought, oh, do I want to do jury service? And I opened it, and I just had to read it about 4 or 5 times over, and then you can't tell anybody. For about 8 weeks, you have to say whether you accept it or not, and you can't tell anybody. And I am a rule follower, so I didn't tell anybody. I didn't tell my mum and dad. And then what I didn't realise actually was that the press are briefed sort of like the day before, and the World Globe, I think it was, published it. And all of a sudden I got a message just as I was getting into bed saying, "Oh my goodness!" And I was like, "What?" Because it's not till tomorrow. What? Somebody leaked this. And then, the news broke. So I am going down to Windsor Castle in a couple of weeks. So, yes, for the investiture, which my children are very much looking forward to.
Sure.
But it just all feels very surreal, and it's lovely.
So looking back, even though
Yes.
you've got a lot to look forward to,
yeah.
let's look back. And is there any one thing in your practice life that you'll never forget?
Do you know what? There's loads of things that I'll never forget. I think from a defence perspective, one of the reasons, if you do the job for the right reasons, that you will never forget is helping people. And, you know, everybody wants to think of being a criminal defence solicitor as being a bit murky, and as I said before, you don't deal with the nice side of life. But there are people who you meet where you know that you make a difference. You know that in some cases you are literally saving them, because nobody likes to think about it, but people make false accusations. And there are 2 cases that I can think of. And I always used to say after they finished, if I never did another case again, that was my career. I knew that I had done good. One was a grandfather who had been accused of touching one of his grandchildren at, it was like a children's activity place. Absolutely absurd allegation. You know, ripped them out of just a completely normal life because somebody had seen something that they quite frankly hadn't. Took the jury minutes to acquit him. But, you know, without somebody who is going to fight your corner and prepare your case properly, that would have been a very different story. There was never any doubt in my mind. And the second one was a young student who had come to Liverpool who was accused of rape. And it was hideous. I mean, the fact that it went to trial, to be honest, was hideous. But it just absolutely destroyed him and his family's life. And actually, I'll never forget this, because it took the jury about 7 minutes, I think, to find him not guilty. And the jury cried when they returned a verdict on him. He sent me a card and it said to Zoe, in Greek, Zoe means life, and that's what you've given me. And they are the things that you don't forget, because it matters. What you do matters.
Zoe Gascoyne OBE. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you for asking me.